Well, I think after Andor Season 2, I'm probably done with Star Wars. Just sad. Like, subscribe, comment down below, and tell a friend. And if you're new here, check out the channel and let me know what you think. Let's dive into Star Wars The Acolyte. Full transparency, I'm not like a Star Wars super fan, but the original trilogy as well as the prequel trilogy are both very near and dear to my heart. The reason I became so attached to film in general is because of this franchise. The first live action movies I ever remember watching as a child was the original trilogy. And listen, the prequel trilogy has a lot, and I mean a lot of issues. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I will be the first one to admit that. But they are a part of my childhood. And I still maintain that while they aren't very well executed, the bones and the core of Anakin's and even the Jedi's story throughout that trilogy, I think is a brilliant concept. Ever since Disney took over ownership of Lucasfilm, it's sort of been a complete mess. And all credit due to them, it hasn't been all bad. Rogue One is probably my second or third favorite film in the franchise. The first two seasons of The Mandalorian were sort of a fun return to form for Star Wars. Clone Wars, especially the final season, was very entertaining. Even Rebels had a lot of good moments. And Andor was, for all intents and purposes, incredible. Honestly, they should just let Tony Gilroy run the whole thing. But then there have been a lot of entries in this franchise that have either been very underwhelming to just downright terrible. The worst part is when they tease these projects and even debut the trailers, they always look amazing. And then you watch and you can't help but feel disappointment. At least that's how I used to be. I haven't been excited for a Star Wars project in years. Anyway, this brings us to The Acolyte, which on paper sounds exciting. It's an era we haven't ever dove into in live action. We have a chance to see the Jedi at the height of their power, and this is considered the golden age of this universe, and we would also get to see the rise of the Sith. All very compelling story elements. And in true Star Wars fashion, they botched the whole thing. I struggled to find any of these characters interesting at all, outside of maybe Kiram. None of them really had any personality, none of their motivations or actions really made any sense at all. In fact, every single character's motivation changes from scene to scene, it feels like. Nothing in this show makes sense. Osha is good and then bad for reasons, and then May is bad then good for other reasons, and none of these reasons ever seem slightly clear. No character uses any sort of rational thinking, pretty much ever. The whole conflict of this show is something that could have been worked out if all parties involved just sat down at a fire and talked them over. And my god, were the first few episodes so drawn out and boring. The pacing was just awful, something that isn't unique to just recent Star Wars series, but also the Marvel ones. Disney has this knack for creating an interesting, overarching narrative, and then unnecessarily stretching the first half of the season out, and then jamming so much into the latter half that everything feels so rushed, to the point where characters are making nonsensical, rash decisions just so they can progress the story forward to wrap it up. And the show suffers a lot from that. They spend so much of the initial runtime introducing characters and flashing back to past events, flashing back within flashbacks to past events, and it's not super interesting. We don't really ever get to know any of them, and by the time that we start to maybe get a glimmer of interest in these characters, the show is over. It's just not good. And before I move on from this point, the finale feels so rushed, and it seems like the producers knew it was rushed, so they threw in a couple fan service moments. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what it seems like. In one scene, we get to see a glimpse of Darth Plagueis observing Kiram and Osha, Didn't even know that was him because you can't really see shit when they show him. He's just shrouded by this dark cave. You can barely see his face. I found that out online afterward. And then you see the back of Yoda's head in the final shot, and both are just like, nah, okay, there's those. And the acting is just so bland. None of these actors give any sort of charisma to their roles. Amandla Stenberg feels like she should be the star of a Disney Channel original series. And anytime she's in a fight scene, she's visibly slow and just looks like she's just stumbling about. The Green Jedi, I don't even remember her name, played by Rebecca Henderson, I think, just sucks any life out of this show every time she's on screen. And then there's Lee Jung-jae, who was phenomenal in Squid Game. Why'd they do this to him? They put him in such a bad spot. His acting is so over the top, and I think it's because he had to learn English for this role. And look, I respect him for taking on that task, but goddamn, just let the man speak his own language. It's not like subtitles are a foreign aspect of Star Wars. This show also suffers from a basic principle that a lot of these shows and movies suffer from. They're missing the magic of Star Wars. Just go back and watch the original trilogy. The essence of those films is the mystical, spiritual, heroic elements. When you watch those movies, you escape into a universe and you enjoy stories about love, friendship, heroism, and embracing, for lack of a better words, a force, a belief that we're all a part of something bigger, something good. The recent projects that have faltered, they're missing a lot of those key elements. I'm all for pointing out the flaws in the Jedi. I think that's an interesting notion. In fact, most interesting characters have flaws. That's what makes them interesting. But I feel so often nowadays, there's just show after show trying to force us to believe that the heroes of this universe are actually evil and they're all villains. It's exhausting. They're just snatching up kids left and right without any question from anyone and adopting them into a cult. And when you take these staple elements out, like recent projects have, they're just so bland. This is why Rogue One is one of my favorites. Sure, I'll admit it's not the most expertly written film, but at its center, it's a simple story about the bonds of friendship, about a group of people coming together to stand for what is right. Something bigger than them against a relentless tyranny. It's compelling. And I don't want to continue to hammer this show because I could go on for so long and it's just going to tire me out and I'm going to get more frustrated. And I know the 14% audience score is pretty terrifying, and don't get me wrong, this show is bad and deserves the criticism it gets, but it's not worse than Boba Fett. I'd rather watch this again, but that isn't really saying anything at all. This show does have a few good qualities going for it. The show looks good. Between the set designs, the scenes on location, and the cinematography, it's for the most part a very beautifully shot series. And then there are the fight scenes. They're fantastic. Honestly, probably some of the best lightsaber fights in this franchise as a whole. They took what the prequels did and added an extra touch of martial arts to the choreography, and it's great. Especially the finale fight between Jacinto and Jung-jae. These scenes really were where their show stood out to me. They were amazing. And look, a lot of these characters are bad, but I think Manny Jacinto as the Sith baddie in this one was a standout, acting and character-wise. I hated his stupid-ass helmet, though. Can we please be done with the helmets? Stop trying to emulate Darth Vader. Just do something original. Anyway, he's great. He's imposing, he's threatening, and honestly, he should have been the Acolyte. He's the best character in the show. The story should have just revolved around him. But the writing team also botched his reveal. He's introduced as this sort of sidekick to May, who is helping her accomplish her mission sent down by her Sith Master. And it's clear like 5 minutes in that he's actually the Sith Master. Then in episode 4, I think, he pulls his mask off for this big reveal. Everyone's supposed to be shocked about it. And everyone who had any sort of common sense at all was like, yeah, we fucking know it's him. So even this show's best character, the writers and producers found a way to somehow screw him up. The Acolyte is just mired by uninteresting characters, a bland, badly paced story, and Lifetime Network style performances. It had the bones to be one of the more revitalizing Star Wars projects in some time. Instead, it was just more of the same. In the end, the Acolyte didn't surprise or disappoint me. It just was, which is just a shame for this franchise. At one point in time, this was such a beloved and storied franchise in film. And look where we are now, just waiting for another yearly release of another installment that nobody wants or cares about, or even watches. I miss good Star Wars. We really need Season 2 of Andor, and we need it fast.